Who is Crom Cruach? Well, Dante Evagus Vulture. Hi, hello, and welcome. Jon O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School. And that is a question that we get asked quite often, but it is easily answered and not so easily answered. So, neat answer, not hard to say. Crom Cruach is believed to be an ancient deity that existed in Ireland. Hard to say is specifics and details about them. So, unlike the Tuatha De Danann, where we have a lot of content in the mythological cycle that talks about them, their arrival into Ireland, who their lineages are, where they came from, them being descendants of the Numidians, we don't have that information when it comes to Crom Cruach. We only have some small fragmentary information left to us, and the main sources for that is the Annals of the Four Masters and the Metrical Dindshenchas. So the Annals of the Four Masters is it's kind of like a litany of different kind of records and stories, and that's why though it covers information that sits kind of around the end of the mythological era, it does move more towards the historical record keeping side of things as opposed to the detailed narrative storytelling side of things. The metrical Denyenicus, on the other hand, is known as the lore of names and places, and there's even less information there. It's less about who the individuals are and more about why a place is named for a particular reason. So we got a couple of things to look at here, and I'm going to read out some of the excerpts for you directly because it might give you a bit of an insight or a bit of perspective. Now, some of the content is quite biased, in my opinion, but maybe as we read through it, you might view it for yourself. So when we find in the Annals of the Four Masters, there's this section, it is talking about the reign of different kings in Ireland. And there's a guy called Tiermas. And Tiermas is believed to is styled as this high king or this great king in Ireland, but he is set around the time frame of the Milesians or after the Milesians. So when we look at the structure of Ireland's mythology, we have the mythological cycle, which includes the Tuatha De Danann coming into Ireland, their conflict with the Firbolg and to take ascendancy, but then also the Tuatha De Danann being removed from power by the Milesians when they come in. So this reign of Tiermas follows quite a bit after that changeover in power. So they were in the known as the Gweddal people. So the Milesians are said to have become the humans, and the humans are this Gael people essentially. So Tiermas is said to be this king or this over king in Ireland, and it's here that we have a reference to Crom Cruach, in that there is believed to have been a cult of worship or a process of paying offerings, sacrifices, obeisances to this individual known as Crom Cruach. So we have, interestingly, here in this, and I find it interesting, you'll see in a moment, I'm just going to actually read out this small section. It says, it was by Tiermas also that gold was first melted in Ireland, in Fothra Ahri Lifi. It was Uachtan, an artificer of the Firchullen, that smelted it. It was by him that goblets and brooches were first covered with gold and silver in Ireland. It was by him that clothes were dyed purple, blue, and green. It was in his reign the three black rivers of Ireland burst forth, Fuvna, Torran, and Callan their names. At the end of this year he died, with the three-fourths of the men of Ireland about him, at the meeting of Mag Slecht in Breffni, at the worshipping of Crom Cruach, which was the chief idol of adoration in Ireland. This happened on the night of Samhain, precisely. It was from the genuflections of the men of Ireland made by Tiermas that the plain was so named. So this is this lore, the naming of places. We do know that before it became Mag Slecht, it was known as Mag Shellig. So the plain of hills and slopes is what it was known, and we see that previously in the Denyenicus in the story of none other than the Dagda and his son Aed. And so his son Aed, who is slain by Corgran, and Corgran is placed under judgment by the Dagda that he has to go and find a suitable stone under which Aed can be buried. And that stone is then said to be in Dún Aileach, which is up in the same area. So before it was became known as Mag Slecht, it was known as Mag Shennig. So it was this plain of hill slopes. But then with the shift in naming here, we have it becoming Mag going from Mag Senec to Mag Select. And actually, interesting, we have another reference in the Dindshenchas about why it was changed. It was in, according to records, it's 1911 BC during the era of Fogden, a Firbolg hiking in Ireland. So the Firbolg were not eradicated or gotten rid of. The Firbolg were still around at the time of the Milesians, and there was actually a number of different conflicts or battles fought by Turnmis and Firbolg. But it was during the reign of this Firbolg king specifically, that it went from being Mag Shennig, which was the plain of hills and slopes, to becoming known Mag Slecht, and that is the plains of prostrations. So this other reference that we have is that there was these obeisances or prostrations done upon this plain, and that Chernmus met his end along with a vast proportion of his men, three-fourths the men of Ireland. All of them were prostrated upon this plain. Another interpretation of Slecht, though, Mag being plain, but Slecht being either prostrations, but could also be referred to as monuments. So maybe Mag Slecht is less a plane of prostrations and more plane of monuments. And the reason why I point that out is when we look at the Metrical Dindshenchas for the second reference we have about Crom Cruach. And this one goes into specifically Mag Slecht, and it talks a bit more about it. So here used to stand a lofty idol that saw many a fight, whose name was the Crom Cruach. It caused every tribe to live without peace, alas for its secret power. The valiant Gwaedil used to worship it, not without tribute did they ask of it to satisfy them their share of the hard world. He was their god, the wizened Cron, hidden by many mists. And as for the folk that believed in him, the eternal kingdom beyond every heaven shall not be theirs. You see what I mean by the bias. From him, ingloriously, they slew their hapless firstborn, with much wailing and peril to pour their blood around Crom Cruach. Now, whether this is actually records of human sacrifice or is this Christian bias being presented as like, oh yeah, they're terrible barbarians, so obviously they were, slaying and like, to be honest, slaying of firstborn children, that's very much Christian God territory too, if we go back to those plagues in Egypt. But again, these travesties are actually placed at the feet of pagan gods in order to shift or change perspectives, maybe, or maybe there was records of sacrifice. We don't know for sure. They do say milk and corn they asked of him speedily in return for a third part of their progeny. Great was the horror and outcry about it. To him the bright Gwaedil did obeisance, from his worship many the crimes, the plain bears the name Mag Slecht. So in this version of the tale, it's Mag Slecht because of the prostrations and the horrors, that the naming wasn't changed by for any other reason other than this particular worship or horrible worship or horrendous activities surrounding Crom Cruach. Thither came Chernmus, prince of distant Tara, one Samhain eve, and with all of his host the deed was a source of sorrow to them. They stirred evil, they beat palms, they bruised bodies, wailing to the demon who held them in thralls. They shed showers of tears, weeping prostrate. Dead the men, void of sound, strength, and hosts of Banba, the land-wasting Chernmus in the north, through the worship of Crom Cruach, hard their hap. So difficult was their life, specifically because they worshipped Crom Cruach. For well I know, save the fourth part of Eager Gwaedil, not a man, lasting the snare, escaped alive without death on his lips. So this is the poetic or romanticized way of saying that, pretty much three-fourths of them died. Round Crom Cruach the hosts did obeisance, though it brought them under mortal shame. The name cleaves to the mighty plain. And this is where interesting we have the record. The last few lines of this makes me wonder, is it less planes of obeisance and like prostration and more planes of monuments? Because we get a description here. It says, ranged in ranks stood idols of stone, 4 times 3. To beguile the hosts grievously, the figure of the Crom was formed of gold. Since the kingship of Ermin, bounteous chief, Worship was paid to stones till the coming of the noble Patrick of Ardmacha. He plied upon the Crom a sledge from top to toe, and no paltry prowess he ousted the strengthless goblin that stood there. So again, this version of the narrative around Manx written by early Christian monks, does seem to include many of the tropes or many of the particular things you would put in order to undermine or the understanding or the belief of anything other than the one true God of Christianity. But still, for that, there are some interesting points that are brought in. When we have it being referred, going from Mag Senga Mag to Mag Select, is it possibly Plain of Monuments? Because there were 12 stone idols around a golden statue. So is it that it was plains of prostration, or was it that there were actually this physical place where people would go and worship? Now, of course, Patrick of Ardmacha is the very famous Saint Patrick, the Welsh guy who came in to become the patron saint of Ireland. Different story, different time. We have some content on there if you want to know true stories about Patrick. Not the greatest guy in all the world, to be honest. Bit of an ass. And a lot of the stuff that's attributed to him wasn't actually done by him. So beautiful propaganda piece and huge play done by the Christian Faith Catholic Church, in essence. But these two references that we have about Crom Cruach gives us interesting insights. Like, so if there is this erected place where people would go and worship, and it wasn't just random people, it was a king would go and bring most of his people to worship there. In the first version, in the first information I read out to you, it doesn't talk about, horribles and sacrifices and murders. It does mention deaths, yes, absolutely, but it also talks about the smelting of gold. So it's during Chermis's time that there was the first smelting, and then there was also the skill in creating and dyeing colors that would not have been existed in Ireland beforehand. And these are crafts. These are like, enhanced crafts and abilities and skills. And if the statue itself of Crom Cruach was made of gold, and it was during Chermis's time that we have the first smelting of gold, it is this understanding of value and this lustrous kind of thing that people would create their monuments out of. But we can't say if there was a gold statue or not, because again, later on, Patrick came around, called it a goblin, undermined it all, and destroyed it. But Crom Cruach, it's, as I said, very interesting. There's like teasing pieces of information that we have around Crom Cruach. The stories of Patrick, like plying against him, overcoming the horrible myths and the terrible, the narrative of Patrick. I'm not going to get into it personally. It does talk about him coming to the top, he coming to the hills there, and it's all this horrible mist, and he's tempted. This trope about him being threatened by demons of the air out of the mists, and it's all just smoke and mirrors show. Because when he actually gets to the center of it, it's actually just a small goblin creature, which he's like, get the fuck. Now that demonizing and diminishing of the narratives of old pagan gods is quite common that we see. Is Crom Cruach a victim of this? Hard to say for sure. Was there an actual broader belief in Crom Cruach? Was he less this murder monster goblin creature and more a deity of abundance, a deity of fertility support? The fact that, and this was a new piece for me. I only learned this in looking up the information for this video. Mag Select, I knew Mag Select being linked with Crom Cruach beforehand, but I did not have the information that it was previously Mag Senig. Mag Senig being linked to the Dagda, another god who is about abundance and is about supporting peoples. So it's a weird one. It really, really is. So who is Crom Cruach? Hard to say for sure, but yes, we can say he is believed to have been an older deity that was worshipped in Ireland after the time of the Tuatha Dé Danann and during the early times of the Gael people who came from Milaspan or the Milesians. So hopefully this has been interesting for you. Hopefully this has given you some insights and perspectives. What do you think of the versions? Is there anything of that resonates or rings with you. Like, the idea that there's this demonizing element of like, oh yeah, they're sacrificing children and pouring blood on idols, or the mention of craft, of skill, of making offerings, giving offerings and asking for support and abundance in your battles or in your life or in the, how do they put it, the grain to grow. So what do you think? As ever, we have a whole lot of free resources available at the Irish Pagan School. All you got to do is go to irishpagan.school /free, and you can find some more content there. You can take some reading from us. You can look up our recommendations and resources. There's even full classes there that you can kind of get into if you're looking to start, grow, or deepen your exploration of Irish mythology or paganism. So until next time, look after yourself. Take care. August Slán. Goodbye.